population, mostly from the Canton region in and around Manila when the Spanish arrived and conquered the city in 1570. Now, it didn't take very long before the relatively few Spanish colonists began to feel uneasy about this much larger Chinese population, so they decided to confine them to an area known as the Parian. This was surrounded by walls where the population could be locked in at night. This was followed by another Chinatown
Segregation.
called Binondo, which was originally meant for Chinese Catholics, and it is still the Chinatown in Manila today. Both of these areas are
so
where the
that's
first
Binondo.
mentions of pancit
crazy.
come from, namely because they were home
I
to
didn't know
many
about that one.
restaurants that sold pancit called panciteria. Now, of course, people could make their own pancit
It's
at
like
home,
one of the most
but
richest,
at
like,
this time, and really for
districts.
the next few centuries, most people seem to get their noodles at
I
a
thought that was only a
panciteria.
thing in US.
There's a document, a Spanish document from 1847 that talks about the native population of the Philippines going to these restaurants and eating this dish. It says, among the many stews that the natives eat and that the Chinese generally sell is the one they
I
call
wanna get that
pancit,
Cindy
made with
figurine.
rice and wheat paste in the form of thick noodles and stewed with
Oh,
minced
wait, I
pork
can
and
buy
various
tickets
gulai,
now for
a
Oshikon.
species of
Yeah,
bean from the
let's go.
country, and sold to customers at
I'm gonna
3/4
get some
of a coin.
tickets.
It
Day
also
2
says that while the
tickets.
natives of the Philippines eat most of their food with their fingers, pancit is different
What the fuck
because
is a
when they eat
kami-ushi
pancit, they use a type of stick called sipit, with which they can carry the food to their mouths. The
is
Chinese
this?
always eat with these sticks,
To
and they
the
handle
event
them with
access,
great
plus the
skill.
most
Sipit is, of
freebies.
course, the Tagalog word for chopsticks or tongs or
random
tweezers or really
bullshit.
anything that kind of pinches. But in this case, he's talking about chopsticks. And I find it really interesting that Europe and China had been trading for thousands of years at this point, and yet so many people in the mid and late 19th century in Europe had no concept of what chopsticks were. I think
I would
that's so
probably just
interesting.
get the
In
Kami-ushi pass, even
1875,
though
a
I'll just-
European visitor went to the Philippines
I mean, I
and
could
ate
go
at a panciteria
in-
and just marveled at these tools that he was
I don't
given
know,
to
bro.
eat his food with.
Maybe.
In place of a fork are two cylinders,
No, I'll
5
just
to
go
8
one
inches
day.
long, made of ebony or wood. To use these sticks, arrange one
What the fuck
between
is
your
this
index
super
finger
pass?
and middle finger. In my opinion, this
Photo
invention was
cards.
adopted for hygiene and with the object of not overindulging,
I'll just
since
get
it
the
is
fucking
obligatory
soup.
to eat small portions at a time.
Give me that
And it's
shit.
interesting that he mentions hygiene because
Super pass.
many of the writers of this
Hello.
period
How are you?
question the hygiene, not
First
of
name.
the chopstick, but of the panciteria itself. The Chinese eating houses are known there by the name of panciteria. On the 2 occasions that I have visited such filthy taverns, I could not overcome the repugnance of the smell and appearance of the various mincemeats. They served them in an infinity of porcelain or china dishes
Holy.
suitable for placing
You
cups
really
of chocolate on
invested
them.
shit
They
on
placed
this.
them on the table
Why is there
or
no
the
PayPal?
floor all at the same time, in the number of 8, 12, or
Okay.
more, depending
you
on
need
the
to pay
price of the place
or
setting.
something.
But the questionable hygiene of these establishments
I'll
did not
remove
seem
my
to
tracking
deter
for a
people
bit.
from actually going to them because the food was so good that it outweighed any minor health code violations that you might witness.
The food
In
was so
1906, the
good
world
that
traveler
they
George Amos Miller visited
didn't
Manila
consider
and wrote
health
about
violations.
his experience.
That's crazy.
And he talks about the fact that there are many fine dining restaurants available, but when you go to one of them, you'll be approached by a man
That's fire.
pompous enough to be the Lord Mayor, and with dignified condescension, he says,
That is crazy.
"What can I do for you?" I always feel like suggesting
can
that
I
he begin
pay
by
this?
deflating himself. Instead, he recommends that you get over the need for a white glove service and head to the Chinatown of Binondo. There, the whole street is devoted to Chino restaurants which are well patronized, and the visit is warranted to relieve hunger whether the food is eaten or not. The stoves are just inside the door. Large pots of different mixtures are stewing away, and on the counter by the stove are placed a half-dozen large and small pots containing various compositions of different color and consistency. A banana leaf serves as a marble slab. He does admit that they are not the most
day.
fastidious establishments, but he said that the food in the company is so
I'll just
good,
pay with my
it
other-
just doesn't really matter. You forget about it.
Oh, so
But
annoying.
that's not to say that the panciteria stayed like this. Many of them adapted over the years and the decades to keep up with the service standards of Manila's other restaurants. One of the oldest panciteria in Manila today actually opened in 1866, and it was called Panciteria Antigua. Today it is called Toho Antigua, and it's on the same location, and supposedly they are serving the same foods that they have served for over 150 years. Well, this restaurant, as soon as it opened, became very, very popular with all walks of society. And one reason that it remained popular was probably because of an ad that they put out in 1931. It boasted that we have become known as the most sanitary panciteria in the city. Then they go on to list why that is. Things like sanitizing the silverware, replacing table linens between guests, refrigerating their food, and preparing it in a sanitary manner. We do all these at great expense in order to eliminate all possible chance of infection to our patrons. Therefore, our patrons are safe to dine with us. We like to take all of these things for granted now when we go to a restaurant.
Yeah,
but
it's still alive.
having worked in the restaurant industry in New York back in the 2000s, I can promise you that that is not always the case. So good on them for boasting about it. Anyway, I think that my favorite mention of a panciteria from a historical document actually comes from a novel written by one of the national heroes of the Philippines and proponent of Filipino independence, Jose Rizal. In his 1891 novel, El Filibusterismo, there is a group of students who are intent on opening a language school to better educate the poorer Filipino population. But the Spanish government and the church are hesitant to let this happen. Finally, they do agree to open a school, but they don't want any of the teaching done by the native Filipinos. They want it done by the Dominican friars. Well, the students decide that this is better than nothing, so to celebrate their partial victory, they start discussing places to go have a party. And one of the more
I bought the fucking
pessimistic
$20
students
ticket. I'm not
chimes
even
in,
going for
saying,
like 2
"No,
days."
gentlemen," observed Pescon with his clownish grin. To celebrate the event, there's nothing like a banquet in a panciteria, served by the Chinese men without camisas. I insist, without camisas. The sarcasm and grotesqueness of this idea won it ready acceptance, Sandoval being the first to applaud it, for he had long wished to see the interior of one of those establishments,
pre-sale
which at night
tickets are
appeared
sold
to be
out.
so merry and cheerful. Camisas were the shirts, the long shirts that the Chinese wore at the time. So essentially, it's saying that the people who serve the food are shirtless. So going back to that idea of maybe not having the same standards as the nicer restaurants of the city. And the book actually deals a lot with the social dynamics of the Spanish versus the native Filipinos versus the Chinese, each group kind of looking down on the other. And it's very, very interesting. It's obviously way too complex to go into here, but I just think that it's really interesting.
I will give her another fucking pregnant art
and the panciteria to kind of display some of that social dynamic. The students, who are mostly native Filipino, though one of them is Spanish, look down on this Chinese restaurant, yet are fascinated with it and really want to go and try the food. And when the food comes, one of the native students,
they won't know it's me.
talks about this food that's being served. Gentlemen, the pancit lang lang is the soup par excellence. As you will observe, Sandoval, it is composed of rice noodles, crabs or shrimps, beaten eggs, scraps of chicken, and I don't know what else. It's pancit lang lang. That is Chinese pancit, to distinguish it from that which is peculiar to this country. Until recently, gentlemen, the pancit was believed to be Chinese or Japanese. But the fact is that being unknown in China or Japan,
I'll give my fucking friend pregnant art.
Let us then dedicate the pancit to the country and to the government. When you read this in the context of the novel, though, it is not as patriotic as it might sound, because the government at the time was not Filipino, it was Spanish.
No, they won't
and the
know
book
it's
is
me.
really all
I'll just
about how
give it
the
and then I'll
Spanish
run.
were kind of reaping the rewards of the Philippines and of the Filipino people. Now, obviously,
I wanted to put in
we don't have time to get into all of that. It is an incredibly
whatever.
complicated story, but it's a fascinating period of history that is not covered
How
much,
often do you
definitely
think they get
in
given
American
they won't know it's me
schools,
because I will
especially
not.
because we get involved.
I won't let them
It's
know.
not
and
our finest hour. But
won't
it
even,
is a
like,
fascinating
fucking
period, and so I
announce
am
that
going to
I'll
put
attend
a couple links in the
Oshikon.
description to some
Or,
videos
like,
that really
on
cover the
live.
topic very well as
Unless you
specifically
watch this
José Rizal.
stream.
Now, to this day,
No,
the
no,
panciteria
no.
is
Seriously.
going strong in
Seriously,
Manila.
they
They're
won't
all
know.
over the place.
I
They're
swear to
very, very
God.
popular. Unfortunately, the panciteria that Rizal mentions in his book, and it was a real establishment, it was called Panciteria Macanista de Buen Gusto. It is abandoned, and it's very sad. But other locations from that period do survive. Now, I have never been to a
I don't know any
panciteria,
of
but I
this.
have had it made at home, and I think that that's probably
I
the
don't
best
know
version.
any of these people.
Today in the Philippines or in the Filipino community,
Who are these
large
people?
plates of pancit are still
they
made
just
today for
accepting literally
celebrations
anyone?
and birthdays and around the new year. It's often eaten for good luck and long life, another tradition brought by the Chinese just
there
like
you
the
go,
dish
Minohan.
itself. But it is not my
Oh, yeah,
birthday,
why is
nor is it the
Minohan
new
not
year,
here?
so I'm just eating my pancit because
The fuck?
it smells really good. So as soon as your pancit has simmered for 10 minutes,
she an
dish it
exhibit?
up and serve it with the sliced
maybe a-
hard-boiled
a
egg and
guest.
calamansi. And here we are, a 100-year-old recipe for Filipino pancit. The noodles are kind of stuck together, so it's hard to get it all, but I'm gonna try. Here we go. I love noodles, but I hate eating them on camera. It's just, there is no delicate way to do so. I need to go back to Miss Manners. Anyway, the
Yo, my
flavor
daughter is
so
performing.
wonderful.
That's
The-
fire.
It has that
That's
seafood
fire.
ness to it, but it's so much more complex. You get, so I had a big old piece of shrimp, so obviously that's one of the main flavors
Mad.
for me. But that shrimp
Maybe I
liquor
should give
and
Maddie
the
pregnant art
patis,
too.
it just adds such
Who
a
else?
complicated flavor to it. It's almost earthy and sweet.
Can I
at the
give my
same
daughter
time.
pregnant
It's kind of
art?
the way that I would describe that flavor. What I really like
That
about
would
it,
be
though,
so
are
funny.
just the noodles themselves.
mean, she did
they're
give me
noodles,
a
but it's the
pregnant art.
texture. Now, I have only ever
It's this
had
one.
pancit where it is just the bihon, which are the very thin rice noodles. I find that
I
that is
will
probably
torment
more
them.
common, at least in the
I
circles I
will
run
let
in.
them know.
And I like that texture. It's really nice.
It's this one.
The,
Look at
the
this.
Miki sometimes
Fucking daughter
other,
drew
like
me
canton
pregnant.
noodles, they are just thicker. They're
So
more
cursed.
like Chinese noodles, whereas these I feel
Like,
are,
bro.
are specific to pancit. They're not, but I feel like they are. Also, I really want to
So
try
fucked up.
one of these calamansi.
I need to go back to art drawing.
Yeah, it tastes like a kumquat, which I don't like. I don't like sour things. It is quite sour. It really does not taste like a lime. You almost have to like take a lime
That's just
and an
now after
orange
big dinner,
and a
bro.
tangerine and I'll mash them together
That's so
and then
fucked.
take away any sweetness. and
Yeah,
that's what it tastes
I'll
like.
get that.
A lot of people really like that flavor. I'm not a fan. But the dish itself, definitely a fan. And it is like one of those just things that you just want to eat a huge plate of. So that's what I'm going to do for dinner. Anyway, make some pancit. Go to a Filipino
Oh yeah, I
restaurant.
should draw
buy
my
some
fucking
pancit. Order some pancit if you don't want to
brand.
make it. And I will see you next time on Tasting History.
I'm pretty sure they'll like fucking exhibit. Wait, let me double check.
During World War II, few countries experienced hunger more acutely than the Soviet Union. But even though food was scarce, the people on the home front made do as best they could by making dishes
whatchamacallit?
like this kasha, or porridge, made with millet and pumpkin. So thank you to Bombas for sponsoring this video as we try to survive on the Soviet home front. This time on Tasting History.
Where's my friend?
Last month, I kicked off this series of home front cooking during World War II with the United States, where the home front and the war front were very much separate. But today, we're going to be talking about the Soviet Union, where the war front and the home front were very often
there you
the
go,
same
Bulbasaur.
place. Now, shortly before the war in Europe began, Germany and the Soviet Union had signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact,
Bulbasaurus.
agreeing that neither country would attack the other while they carved up the smaller countries between them. But then, on June 22nd, 1941, Germany and other Axis powers invaded the Soviet Union along an 1,800-mile front. And as it was a surprise attack, the Soviet Red Army was rather unprepared and took heavy losses, especially in that very first month. And so too did the Soviet people. Even if they were not right in the direct line of German panzers, they felt the effects of the invasion right away, most keenly in their stomachs. Within a month, Soviet citizens received their first ration cards, and from the start, rations were pretty meager. And we'll talk about just how meager they were, but before we do that, I wanted to find a recipe that kind of typifies what somebody might be eating at the time.
Why would you do such
thing? The problem is that unlike most of the other countries I'm going to cover in this series, there were very, very few cookbooks being published in and around Russia at the time, and that was kind of on purpose. See, during the previous decades, there had been a push to liberate women from what they called kitchen slavery. That is, they shouldn't have to spend all day cooking, so they could work outside of the home. There was also an early idea of Bolshevism that relied on kind of an ascetic lifestyle, and this led food to change and become more simplified, and this led to few recipes being written down.
This time,
in the late 1930s,
I won't even
there was a backlash against this ideal, and so to revive and codify the cuisine of the different Soviet republics, the Ministry of the Food Industry, headed by Anastas Mikoyan, released an iconic cookbook in 1939 called Kniga o Vkusnai и Zdorovai Pishya, or the Book of Tasty and Healthy Food. So naturally, I looked to that cookbook to find recipes from the period, but I found that many of the recipes use ingredients that wouldn't have been available to like 90% of the population. They definitely read more aspirational than actually achievable. But I did find one recipe for something called kasha, which is a sort of porridge. This version of it uses millet, which became the staple grain during World War II, and it uses an ingredient that people would have been able to grow at home, and that is pumpkin. Place peeled and finely chopped pumpkin in hot milk and cook for 10 to 15 minutes. Then add washed millet.
I'll just hit and run.
And stirring, continue cooking for another 15 to 20 minutes until thickened. Place the cooked porridge in a water bath or in the oven for 25 to 30 minutes. Now, versions of this dish are still made today in most of Eastern Europe, and with autumn right around the corner, it's the perfect dish for a crisp autumnal morning, something to warm your belly. And if you're looking to warm your feet, might I suggest a pair of socks from today's sponsor, Bombas. So if you haven't heard of Bombas, they are an amazing sock company.
Hit them hard.
And they don't just sell socks, they also give them away.
Like what the
for
Germans
every
did
item that they sell,
back in World War II. Blitzkrieg.
And to this day, they have donated over 100 million items to those in need. And it's not just socks, but underwear and t-shirts too, and those are the number 1, 2, and 3 most requested items at shelters, so everyone that gets donated is a good thing. And the socks are excellent. They're really, really comfortable, nice and soft. I got a pair that is specifically meant for running, though I don't run, but I do walk a lot. Is running history 20 at checkout. And now, let us make this kasha, for which you will need 1 cup or 220 grams of millet, 3 cups or 710 milliliters of whole milk, a pumpkin, and it being August, it turns out pumpkins are kind of hard to find at this time of year, so I am using a Japanese pumpkin, which absolutely works, and it will provide more than enough pumpkin because this recipe actually only calls for 500 grams. 1 teaspoon of sugar and a half teaspoon of salt. So first peel your pumpkin and then chop it into small pieces, a little less than an inch cubed. And again, you're looking for only 500 grams of the pumpkin after peeling and chopping. Then put the pumpkin in a pot and pour the milk over it, and then place the pot over a medium heat and bring it to a low simmer. Set the lid on and let it simmer for about 10 minutes. And as it simmers, you can wash your millet. And make sure to really rinse the millet until the water runs clear. It can take a little time, but then you can add it to the pot along with the salt and the sugar. And what's interesting about this recipe is that it doesn't actually say to put the sugar in there, but sugar is in the ingredient list, so I'm assuming that it goes in around now, but I could be wrong. It's not maybe the best written recipe. My recipes, on the other hand, are very well written. Those in the Tasting History Cookbook,
on the other hand, okay, bro, you're glazing
yourself. Next Tasting History Cookbook, my Patreon patrons are already testing the recipes, so thank you to them. Now once you've added the millet, salt, and sugar, stir everything together.
He's glazing
and let it
himself!
return to a low simmer, and then put the lid on and let it simmer for another 15 to 20 minutes as it starts to thicken up and the millet softens. Every few minutes,
yeah, bro, my cock is harder than them.
To incorporate any milk that's starting to form a skin on top, but you want to be gentle because you don't want to break up the pumpkin. Now while it thickens, set your oven rack to the very
That's
bottom
what he
rung
literally said,
and
not
preheat
me.
the oven to 275
What do you
Fahrenheit,
mean?
135 Celsius, and then when the millet has softened, set the pot with the lid on in the oven and let it bake for 25 minutes. Now with the milk and the sugar especially, this is definitely a dish that would have been made during the very best of times during World War II and during rationing, but I wanted to take a closer look at some of the not best of times. The Axis invasion of the Soviet Union, known as Operation Barbarossa, named after a Holy Roman Emperor and Crusader from the 12th century, was the country's official introduction to World War II, known in the Soviet Union as the Great Patriotic War. But they actually entered the war somewhat battered already, both militarily, having sustained heavy casualties in the 1939 Winter War with Finland, and in a domestic sense. Between 1936 and 1938, Stalin led a terror campaign known as the Great Purge. And on top of that, the late 1930s saw several years of poor harvests, so when, within just a few months of the invasion, Germany came to control half of the Soviets' acreage used to grow grain, the Soviet government had to act lest their entire population would starve. And the starvation of the Soviet population was actually part of Germany's plan. See, in the months before the invasion, the German High Command realized that should they wish to press the war into Russia, the vast distances and the poor transportation in Soviet-controlled lands would eventually leave the German military, the Wehrmacht, stranded without food. Thus, it was determined that 1. The war can only be continued if the entire Wehrmacht is fed from Russia in the third year of the war, and 2. If we take what we need out of the country, there can be no doubt that tens of millions of people will die of starvation. This was what would become known as Der Hungerplan, or the Hunger Plan, and it was overseen by Herbert Bacher, who worked for the Reich Ministry of Food and Agriculture. And the plan called for all food that was made from Soviet lands to either be fed to the Wehrmacht or shipped all the way west to feed the German home front. And the plan partly worked. Many millions did die of starvation. But the food was not getting to the Wehrmacht or the German home front, because in the weeks after the invasion, Stalin decreed that all valuable property, including non-ferrous metals, grain, and fuel which cannot be withdrawn, must without fail be destroyed. So as the Germans moved toward Moscow, they found pretty much nothing. It was all burnt up crops and destroyed farm implements. This was known as the Scorched Earth policy, which was the same policy that the Russians had employed on Napoleon when he invaded Russia 130 years earlier. Worked on him, and it would work on the Germans as well. It is an effective tactic, but unfortunately it leaves a lot of people starving. So a month after the invasion started, the Soviet citizens received their ration cards. Now the US had rationing, but it was set up very differently than in the Soviet Union. In the US, everybody got the same amount of food. You would get the same as the teacher down the street and as the President of the United States. In theory, he did follow rationing. But that's because while food was scarce, there wasn't a huge sense that there was going to be any mass starvation. This was not the case in the Soviet Union. There already was mass starvation, even when it kind of began. So with famine definitely being in the cards, it really came
What if I
down
streamed for
to
12 hours?
just keeping as many
It's time to
people
drink water.
alive as possible.
You're grinding?
So
It's
the
time
way
to drink
that
Bro, I don't have
the
fucking water
Soviet
anymore. There's no water downstairs.
It's time to drink water.
There were different categories.
It's time to
There
drink
were the
water.
workers, meaning people who did manual labor and hence needed more calories.
Bro, go sleep.
And then there were
Go
white-collar
sleep.
employees who generally got fewer.
Go sleep.
Independents and young children.
I mean, I won't
who
be
needed
streaming
the
tomorrow.
least. And your
Maybe.
specific industry would also affect how many calories you got. Basically, the more important you were to the war effort, the more food you got. Now, with all of this variation and a lot of variation throughout different periods of the war, it's hard to say exactly how much anyone was getting. But on average, a person would get about a pound, maybe a little bit more, a pound of bread a day, and 3 to 4 pounds of meat per month. But while the central government was setting these rules, they often didn't have the manpower to kind of oversee them and make sure that everybody was getting what they needed. Their focus was the Red Army, who was fighting the Germans, getting them fed. And so the rationing to the people often fell to more local authorities. And there were a few ways that people would get fed. One was actually by growing victory gardens, things like vegetables, the pumpkin that we're making today, fruit, sometimes a little bit of livestock. Then there were the systems set up by the state. This was usually basics like canned meat, bread, and grain that would be distributed at shops and bakeries. And the government also had a system of stolovaya, or canteens or cafeterias, which were government-run restaurants where, provided they had the food available, you could get an actual meal. But again, that's only if they had the food available, and there was often the question of, is there actually going to be food there? Because with half of the acreage of farming gone, they had trouble growing enough food for their population. And this is where the United States stepped in. Just as the US had been providing food and equipment to Great Britain and China, the Soviets would benefit from something called the Lend-Lease Act. Passed in March of 1941, it was determined that supplying those countries fighting the Nazis and the Japanese was essential for the defense of the US even before we were at war. In a November 1941 letter to FDR, Joseph Stalin wrote, "Your decision, Mr. President, to give the Soviet Union an interest-free credit of $1 billion in the form of material supplies and raw materials has been accepted by the Soviet government with heartfelt gratitude as urgent aid to the Soviet Union in its enormous and difficult fight against the common enemy, bloodthirsty Hitlerism." While much of the assistance was sent in the form of weapons and military supplies, the US also sent 4.5 million tons of food overseas. One of the most iconic foods sent to the Soviet Union was pork, canned in the style that Russians were accustomed to. A very fatty canned pork called tushonka, which was canned by companies like Kroger Grocery and Baking Company, who produced it in Cincinnati, Ohio. This stuff was much loved and much hated. Much loved because during World War II, you were grateful to have anything to eat. Much hated because it lasted forever. As late as the 90s, people were still eating the tushonka from World War II. You can still get it today, but I don't think it's from World War II. Probably some cans still hanging around there. Maybe Steve Emery will eat it. I did get a modern can of it. Haven't tried it yet, but maybe I'll do that in like a separate video, if I can get up the gumption. But even with the US trying to fill the gap between hunger and starvation, it usually wasn't enough because most of the food was going to feed the Red Army and not the civilian population.
What the
so
fuck?
People had to get creative with their cuisine. First to enter the diet were something called invented foods. And the government in 1943 started a campaign to get people to try these invented foods. Basically, they were foods that were created in a lab setting that would be able to add certain nutrients to other foods. Like nastoy khvoy, which is a pine needle extract that delivered a lot of vitamin C. For extra protein, there was a yeast extract known as belkovye droji, which worked. It did add protein, but it also added a really bitter taste to whatever it went into, so it kind of ruined your soup or whatever. But, you know, need the protein. Now, these were foods that were created in a laboratory and kind of put on the people by the government. But individual people also had to come up with new food ideas or old food ideas. One thing that they looked to was the gulag. Now, those who found themselves in these horrific prisons were prone to starvation even when the country wasn't at war. And so the prisoners, or whoever was running the gulag, often had to come up with dishes that used but the meagerest of ingredients. And one of these was a sort of stew called balanda, which a former inmate described as soup made of flounder, which comes straight from the barrel and is boiled up, guts and all, with salt. Then red cabbage is added in, and you have your gruel. It's unbelievably bitter. You wouldn't be able to eat it, but we did, because there was nothing else. And so this soup that was once relegated to the gulags of Russia was now being served on the tables of Russia to the average person. And it was usually made with kind of leftover ingredients that you really should probably toss away, like horse bone or herring tail, things like that. Then it would be thickened with millet, most often, which is what we're using today, or rusks that are broken up. And rusks are like hardtack. Another food with very little nutritional value was something called shroti, And this was when they would take either linseed or some other seed like hemp seed, and they would make oil out of it. And then the hulls that were left, which would usually be tossed or given to animals as fodder, were made into cakes and cooked. And this is what they would eat in the very, very worst of times, like in Leningrad. In September of 1941, the German army advanced from the south, while the Finnish army invaded from the north to almost encircle the city of Leningrad, a city of nearly 3 million people. They blockaded the city and lay siege for 872 days. There was one route in and out of the city via Lake Ladoga, a route that would become known as the Road of Life. Now, eventually, many people would be evacuated out on this road and food would be brought in. But it wasn't an option in that first winter. So by November of that first year, the ration for workers had dropped to only 250 grams of bread, and for dependents and children, 150 grams. That's like 3 slices of bread a day. And since this was a city and the war had just begun, nobody had planted any victory gardens and there was no farmland. And so as the Leningrad food commissioner, Dmitry Pavlov, said, the sole means of receiving food was through the ration card. This, of course, led to counterfeiting ration cards and the theft of ration cards, as well as just a black market. But most of the population, they relied on what was known as the line. These were lines that stretched outside of bakeries and shops that were giving out the rationed food. In their diaries, many people likened them to snakes or tapeworms wending their ways through the streets. And the first thing you did when you woke up in the morning was you got in line. Where gripped by one all-consuming passion, they hardly uttered a word. With manic impatience, they stared ahead over the next man's shoulder at the bread. An old woman waiting for bread slowly slides to the ground, but no one cares. She is dead, or she will be trampled nevertheless. Those waiting tilt their heads to see if her ration card has fallen on the ground. Perhaps it is still tightly clutched in her bony hand.
Ate the fucking
Addy balls. Is that for many of these people waiting, there would be no bread at the end of the line. Because by 10 or 11 in the morning, the shop would be empty. People would try to coax other people out of line, telling them that another bakery or shop had just gotten fresh delivery and they should go into that line. Or they would fake air raid sirens to try to get people to scatter for cover. Many people were reduced to eating clover and wallpaper paste, pine needles, rats, animals out on the streets, or others.
I respect it.
And when a family member died, they would often try to keep it hidden.
I swear to God, I told this to people. If I'm a fucking woman,
a couple more days. Is how
I would be a fucking slut
the population
and just fuck everyone.
Had to survive. But there were those
STD.
who were more fortunate or less scrupulous. One girl in her diary recalled, "I didn't go hungry. My father works in Leningrad supply. During the blockade, we ate better than before the war. We had everything." At the party headquarters at Smolny in Leningrad, it was said that they were eating cake while the people outside were starving, very French Revolution-like. Yes, only under the Bolsheviks, only under Soviet power is it possible
if you're
to
male,
have such rest
you'll
under
get
the
called
conditions
sex
of war,
predator
of a prolonged siege of a city. What could be better? We eat, drink, stroll about, sleep, or we simply have nothing to do. While at the same exact time, just outside the doors, 2,000 to 3,000 people every day were dying of starvation. Now, Leningrad is an outlier. It really is the worst situation for the Soviet people, for the home front at least. But the rest of the country was going through periods of famine throughout the war, especially because in the early 40s, pretty much every harvest was below average, even considering that they had lost half of their harvesting lands. So most people were dependent on the foods that they were growing themselves, things like potatoes, beets, and pumpkins.
That's why I touched
that we are using in the kasha, which should be about ready. So once the kasha has baked for 25 minutes, remove the pot from the oven and dish it up. And here we are, millet and pumpkin kasha from the Soviet home front. It's actually a really pretty color. I mean, it's like vibrantly colored. I was not expecting that. Let me get a little bit of everything on here.
I'm
you
so
definitely
sorry, Kajan,
smell the pumpkin. That is the smell you're getting.
I just wanted to
I don't
feel
really know what millet smells
closer
like.
to my heart.
I'm playing, I guess. Here we go.
Bro.
That's actually pretty good. I mean, I would add more like sugar or something like that, but the pumpkin is sweet, and so you do get the flavor of the pumpkin. That is what kind of shines through.
I just wanted to make Naoko do that voice. Bro, you want me so bad, what the hell?
Let me put you out on some car game that you can't get anywhere else. Starting with budget car ball knowledge. Who doesn't want a cheap, awesome car? Doesn't sound very realistic, right? It feels like you can only choose two out of cheap, reliable, and fast. But luckily, there's some
I'll just fucking watch the Factorio. Factorio! Space Age. Let's try something else.
I'm about to show you one of my favorite images of all time. Ready? The joke is obvious. A little car key character, and therefore the idea of driving, offering you the thing you shouldn't have before driving. And you assume this is a one-off image made to tell a
Just watch it.
one-off joke. But it isn't. The same artist who made this also made a hand grenade offering you a beer, and a bicycle pedal, a credit card scanner, a door, a piggy bank, a radiator, a carrot, the British pound, the male gender, the country of Poland, and dozens of other versions of this same beer offering pose with unrelated items that make no sense. But these wouldn't exist if they made no sense. These images are the works of Paweł Talichkowski, a 3D artist from Poland who, over the course of a 12-year career, has produced over 58,000 3D images. An endless archive of surreal plasticky characters and things, all posed and arranged into an infinity of different meanings, selling them online as stock images available for anyone to buy and use for anything. Although at first glance many have no reason to exist, they are all built to serve some tiny niche purpose. And Paweł is just one artist in an entire industry that creates weird 3D stock images like this. Like this goldfish storming out of his bowl, luggage in hand, or this jolly hamburger giving you a thumbs up with his big sludgy ugly hand, or this plasticky noodle-limbed humanoid screaming at the top of his lungs, or
Hey, what's
this snail kind of just staring at you like he wants you to stay away from him, or any other one out of an infinity of equally surreal, amusing little 3D internet entities that just seem to appear on your screen every few months before vanishing back into whatever algorithm they emerged from. But these aren't just random little PNG creatures that crawl into PowerPoint presentations animations to make life more fun. These are products, mass-produced by 3D artists to fulfill the needs of paying customers. Careers are built with these things. They're pumped out on a conveyor belt, placed on a virtual store shelf, and sold to real businesses. But most of us never see that. It's only when one or two particularly bizarre ones escape containment and spread out to the rest of the internet that we see these things being shared around ironically, unaware of their true industrial scale. And after scouring the internet for every one of them I could find, tracking down their original creators, and even asking them about them myself, that's including one conversation, by the way, where the creator of this image described himself to me as, and I quote, an autistic war machine. I finally understand these images. So where is all this actually coming from? Who is making this stuff? And why is it so weird?
Bro. Why did this shit even exist?
This penguin, usually donning shades, is possibly the most iconic stock image character ever produced. Whether he's gunslinging as a sheriff, calling someone on a comically large phone, brandishing a baton as a policeman, or imitating another infamous weird 3D character. And he is one of many wacky cartoon animals created by Steve Young, an artist from the United Kingdom with over 7,000 images to his name.
Bro,
A treasure trove of happy-go-lucky little bumblebees, birds, brains, hedgehogs,
Where's
snowmen,
the flopping
elephants,
stock
smiley
image?
faces, and
Should I
countless other
draw one?
glossy synthetic cyber critters. With some standout gems like the aforementioned slimy side-eyeing snail, or this smug rotund robin, always looking at you like he knows something you don't. And Steve's characters perfectly illustrate how the often absurd variety of these images is mainly a result of an artist building one base character model they like, and then from a grab bag of props and items and poses, just customizing that character over and over again to squeeze as much worth out of it as possible. His penguin isn't really a character in the traditional sense at all. He's actually more of a search engine. Each new prop or costume put onto him is a new word entered into a search bar. The personality and charm people cherish him for is secondary to his actual function, which is simply to be retrievable under as many search terms as possible, as easily as possible, to place as many sales as possible. And from that objective alone, you'd expect these characters to feel like robotically optimized stock corporate mannequins, but they don't. They feel like anything but stock or corporate, and that's what's so special about them. And this prop swapping routine is the exact same underlying mechanism behind Pavel Talachkowski's endlessly recycled and rearranged little plastic homunculi, and it explains the work of so many other artists, from career professionals to amateur hobbyists.
What if I make
From
a 3D
this
of
little Euro coin
grapplings?
character by
Bro,
German
you
artist
learn how
DS
to 3D.
Artwork, who you can find parachuting, breakdancing, planting flags, and hopping out of hands, to the just mesmerizing miniature Y2K people of Brent Walker, country of origin unknown, as they wander around the utopian fields and virtual cyberscapes of the future we were promised but never got, to even the just faceless little bulb-headed grey humanoids that you can find doing literally anything online. Remember these. They will come up later, but the longer I stared at this wall of computer-generated penguins, the more I felt them staring back at me, calling me, inviting me into their world. What drives a man to make literally hundreds of PNG penguins? I wanted to know. I wanted to find Steve Young and ask him about his penguins. And so I did. Now, Steve has barely any online presence. His Instagram is private, he has no Twitter, no Facebook, no LinkedIn, and besides this single cryptic image of countless wireframe penguins he has uploaded to his Threads account, he basically doesn't exist outside of his actual stock image profiles. But miraculously, his Dreamstime profile, which has otherwise had all its images taken down, contains a link to zeroconstraints.com. The
Commission
site
Steve.
no longer exists. But by searching for it in the Wayback Machine, we can find the scattered remains of Steve's old personal website. Digging up some old caricatures of his, a couple 3D renders, and even some development images from his time modeling environments for a few licensed video games back in 2010. With this Uptown City area for Disney's The Sorcerer's Apprentice on the DS, and this door for The Lord of the Rings Aragorn's Quest for the Wii and PlayStation 2, along with this hazy, dreamlike living room designed as cover art for an old sci-fi novel. And as fate would have it, an old email of his was listed at the bottom of this barely functioning 2014 archive. Well, here goes nothing. I cannot disclose anything beyond this point. He wasn't able to answer any questions about his work publicly, though Steve was happy for me to share that he has since become a subscriber of the channel and is a fan of the show. I thanked him for the kind words and for getting back to me. Holy shit. The guy who made this penguin is watching this right now, and although we couldn't speak to him, I was able to speak to someone else. This is Julian Tromer, the most prolific and I'd wager commercially successful 3D stock imager of all time, with over 200,000 images of cartoon creatures and characters to his name. A library so large Shutterstock breaks trying to access anything past page 999, which isn't even halfway. He's worked with Disney Channel and Louis Vuitton and dozens of other huge brands, and according to this 2018 Q&A he did with Shutterstock themselves, his bestsellers are among the most popular on the entire site, and therefore the entire industry. And if I wanted a peek into this world, if I wanted to understand how this little 3D universe actually works on the inside, who better to ask than the person who's literally done it the most? Well, I was able to get in contact with Julian, and he was happy to answer a few questions.
Autistic for
Here's what he told me. 30 years ago, I was working as a web designer, making GIFs and flash animations to help advertise people's websites back in the 90s. In his own words, he made those annoying ads in the beginning of the internet. I did it all, even adult stuff. Ah, old times, the Wild West. At the time, 3D characters were just something he made on the side as a hobby while learning how to use Lightwave and 3ds Max. I was actually late to the stock game, he said, but when I started, I already had a few characters ready. As I said, it was just for fun, as a passion, not for the money. And for Julian, it kind of just snowballed from there. Eventually, he said, stock had become my job. It's a very organic process. First you have fun, then some start to sell more than others, then people write to you asking for more poses, and so on. And over the years you automate some processes. You become a factory of some sort. I then asked him if there was a system behind making so many different images out of each individual character, and he explained 3D takes time, but once you have modeled, textured and rigged your character, it becomes a puppet and you can reuse the character. For example, there was a time when I just made animals, so you start in ZBrush, make the character, then move to other softwares where you reuse the same classic poses and make variants for Christmas, birthdays, different jobs and so on. But he did make it very clear to me that some characters just beat the others and it isn't even close. He stressed to me the huge bestseller has always been The Frog. I can't emphasize this enough. And well, even from an outsider looking in, that's undeniable. This frog is Julian's most used character. He's made over 2,000 images with him alone. His most sold image ever is this one of him peering around a corner.
Bro.
And in that Q&A I mentioned a minute
I don't
ago,
think
Shutterstock
you guys will
literally
sell well.
introduced Julian as the man behind the frogs. He said to me, I
What
can't
does
tell you the numbers.
the man
but
behind the
you've been
frogs?
amazed." I told him he
You
had
hate
the
us?
largest 3D stock
Oh,
catalog
hate
I'd
you
ever
guys.
encountered and was curious how someone produces so much work. To which he uttered, I have been an autistic war machine and for more than 20 years in the stock
Autistic
space.
war
I had
machine.
for a time Chinese bosses who called me the Chinese because I worked so much. There was a time when I
The
produced
Chinese.
so much. I asked Julian a sixth and final question after this, but I'll save that one for later. So we know he's an absolute workaholic. That explains the 200,000. But as it turns
I need to
out,
get something.
today, that's kind of the only way to survive anyway. Let's say you are an artist uploading images to a stock image website. Every time someone downloads one of your images, you get a cut of what they paid for it. How much that cut is does vary from platform to platform, but it's almost always the platform itself getting the majority. On Shutterstock, for example, artists at most get 40% of the revenue from a sale, meaning if someone pays $10 for your image, you get 4, the house gets 6. Sounds simple enough, but most customers aren't actually paying per image since that's way too expensive for what it is. They're paying through a monthly subscription for tens if not hundreds of images at a time. I mean, to get all the images I've been using in this video, which is literally hundreds, I've paid for a 750 images subscription. It cost me £246. That's $329, which sounds like a lot, and well, it is. But per image, I'm actually only paying 44 cents, meaning for each image you see today, its creator is receiving just 18 cents. And according to Alexandre Rottenberg, an active Shutterstock contributor of over 10,000 assets to the platform, the average image makes just 8 cents per month. Yep, almost one entire dollar per year. So trying to build a roster of just a few high quality images is not gonna work unless they all massively and unrealistically overperform. You've got a better chance at a salary by brute forcing your way there with thousands and thousands of images, each earning just a little bit each, but adding up to a decent amount altogether, with some overperformers here and there adding a nice bonus onto that, which may sound off-putting, and it kind of is, but that's today. Most of the images we're looking at were being done around the industry's 2009 peak, a time where the average image was making literally 9 times more, or at the latest, the early to mid 2010s, still able to catch the later half of that gold rush, which also explains why so many 3D works are themed around things like cybersecurity or eco-friendliness. Issues like these were a big deal in our collective conscience back then, and naturally articles and presentations in schools were tackling the issues and needing material in doing so, hence the endless amount of anthropomorphized bacteria attacking computers in 2000s clip art, meant to visualize the dangers of viruses and malware online to a generation of children born into a digitized online world, of which I was one. Probably why I have such an attachment to this exact theme of 3D stock images. Of course, this is just supply meeting demand, but it does mean looking back through stock image catalogs is like looking back through an accidental archive of our anxieties as a society. And whereas most people uploading stock images are doing so with real life photography, which requires high quality camera equipment and real human people to model for you in different locations, racking up travel expenses, needing particular items and so on, all adding up to thousands of dollars, CGI costs however much your software does, and then past that, you're only spending your time. So the sheer volume approach is a lot more affordable for a 3D artist. To have an actual person model 30 to 40 different costumes and poses, or hold different items and gestures, will cost you $50 an hour for however long it takes. But to have your little toon penguin do that, well, he's the one paying you. And this is how stock imagery, and within it 3D imagery, works. Most images make barely any money, while a small fraction of images make huge money. It's all about increasing your odds at hitting that jackpot, which explains why these images exist, why there's so many of them, and how they are made, but not why they can look so weird. So weird. Like this clock wandering up a flight of stairs, or this sentient denture chasing after some chocolate, or even this Planet Earth character who was just ever so slightly off. Why do these look so weird? Well, to answer that, we need to talk about the creator of this image. This image, titled Goldfish with Suitcases, is one out of over 3,500 3D rendered images published and sold by Fabio Berti, an Italian artist who's worked with CGI since its infancy in the mid to late 80s. His work spanning finance, health, environmentalism, geopolitics, technology, and love all having this surreal quality to them, even among his competitors. Berti taking currencies, organs, devices, and foods and rendering them in this surreal digitized style, welding onto them these cartoonish plastic limbs. You see pale sneaker-wearing brains marching down winding impossible roads. You meet with unblinking eyes peering out of coffee cups. You walk in on a boardroom of medications discussing the rise of something. This is the world of Fabio Berti, where the reality we know is disassembled and repackaged to us in a bleached white hollow computerscape. And after spending the last 3 months of my life digging through thousands of 3D stock images, I can tell you with certainty that Fabio Berti's are my favorites. There's just something so deeply unsettling yet weirdly comforting about this all, and I wouldn't put it past Berti to have leaned into this intentionally. His personal website listing not just his 40-year history in computer graphics at a very high, actually nationally respected and award-winning professional level, but also displaying his works in other art forms, from traditional painting and photography to logos, advertisements, and web designing to everything in between, all still infused with the same surrealist experimental DNA as his 3D stuff. And as you could imagine, I was very eager to get a peek into the inner workings of this bizarre world, so I sent Fabio an email explaining I was making a video about 3D stock characters and I'd love to ask him a few questions.
You
To which,
motherfuckers.
2 days
What do you mean it
later,
would make more money
Fabio
if
Berti
he sent
was
invoices?
happy to answer. Here's
You hate
what he told
me!
me. I started creating stock
do it.
images in 2009. There's
Give me
no
some time.
specific reason why I started. I've always created pencil drawings and illustrations ever since I was a child, and this is probably a way for me to put myself out there, to see
got
if people
water.
like my projects
Shit
and
to me
ideas,
instead.
and if
What?
they're successful. I asked him how he decides what images to actually make, and he explained, the creative process that leads me to create images stems from concepts or situations I've seen, or maybe even just dreamed about. I don't have a specific workflow. I make sketches on paper or jot down notes about things that catch my interest throughout the day, sometimes while reading the news and newspapers, watching TV, or browsing the internet, and then I develop them on the computer using various 2D and 3D
Send me
programs.
bro, you're not even
without
commissioning me at
using
at this
AI.
moment.
And I
What do you
asked him
mean?
again, as I did with
No.
Julian, if there is a calculated system behind his reuse of characters, and whether he sees a pattern in what images sell best and so on, and he told me, I don't follow any particular formula. In my opinion, the most beautiful images are the simplest ones, those that stir something in the viewer's soul and perhaps make us feel like children again. There's no need for big special effects. Many of my images feature recurring subjects, most often parts of the human body, to more effectively represent highly metaphorical concepts. I then asked him if the weird, surreal feeling of his images was intentional, and he confirmed, all my images intentionally have a strong surrealist character, stemming from my passion for artists from different eras and nationalities such as René Magritte, Marcel Duchamp, Benito Jacobiti, and Banksy. And penultimately, I asked him to explain the meaning of the goldfish with suitcases image. He told me, this image represents the concept of leaving one's birthplace and the environment where one grew up, one's comfort zone, for a place that one hopes will be better. The doubt remains as to whether one will succeed and be happier. It's a melancholic image that makes you think. But the goldfish will make it. I'm sure of it. I've created
What
several
does
images based
bro
on the same
mean by
concept.
this?
This one is perhaps the best. I asked Fabio a seventh
He
and
can
final
count the
question
idea that
after
you gave
this,
him
but
before.
again, I'll save
For the
that
future.
for later,
Oh,
because
okay,
it's
bro.
most clearly
I'm not
in
sending
Fabio
you an
Berti's
invoice.
3D work, and like he said, how he tries to effectively represent highly metaphorical concepts, that one of the main mechanics behind the weirdness in this stuff is unveiled, which is that so many of these images are the result of an artist having to make abstract things literal. Think about what a stock image actually has to do. It has to sit at the top of an article or the side of a PowerPoint slide, and in that fraction of a second before the reader's eye moves to the rest of the text, it has to visualize what the surrounding content is saying. It needs to turn something you can read and understand in your mind into something you can see physically with your eyes. But most of the ideas 3D images need to visualize are abstract, since anything real world and literal can be captured perfectly already with an actual photograph. 3D artists are left with what can't really be captured in reality.
It's time to
Ideas
drink water.
like financial risk and security,
It's time
I
to
just
drink
drank
water.
water.
of gambling, or the
It's
devaluation
time
of
to
a
drink
currency,
water.
and so on. Things that don't
It's time to
quite
drink
have
water.
a natural physical form.
You're gonna
So
drown
how do you
me.
make the invisible visible? You
Actually
make
gonna
it
start
literal.
drowning me.